All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our self-publishing workshop with Adam Corres. Just a reminder that we are recording this and we'll be posting on YouTube and Odyssey. Today we welcome Adam to share his expertise on self-publishing in Kindle. Adam responded to our president, Joe Quirk, when he asked for advice on how to self-publish, and he gave us a lot of great information that we wanted to share with you. This is also a continuing event as part of our novelist program, which we hosted to support people who wanted to write a novel for National Novel Writing Month in November. We hope that they have completed their novels. I haven't heard from everyone yet, but we hope that they've completed their first draft. And so this is the next step to start thinking about how to get that published and get people reading your novel that you wrote for NaNoWriMo. So Adam has a presentation he'll be talking through, but if you have questions that come up, feel free to put them in the chat throughout the conversation, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So please go ahead, Adam, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I work for the University of Southampton in Ocean and Earth Sciences, and my office is in the National Oceanography Centre, and that's really my interest in seasteading. Apart from that, I also copy edit academic journals and publications. And as a third string, I also am a writer. So I think I've written in all media formats now. And I've used Amazon KDP for self-publishing. So although there are other systems out there, I think Smashwords, I can't really talk about ones I haven't used. So this veers towards KDP, but I wouldn't say that that's the only option you should check out. Can I first of all see how many people have published or self-published before? Right, hands up. Okay. Yeah, I realize it will be a diverse audience, and therefore some people will want the technical details and some will be doing this for the first time, perhaps as a result of being part of National Novel Writing Month. I also started on National Novel Writing Month, but I've only got to about 37,000 words in the month, so it will take me a bit longer. I would say, has everybody backed up their work? This is a really obvious question, but I lost a novel once because the laptop died.
Well, I've got about 6 or 7, so I'm covered.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. The other thing is, as you're all seasteading authors, could I just check that you're not all using the same title? Because I thought the Seasteaders or the Seastead or Seasteading is just so obvious. It probably would be best to know now.
I don't even use the term in my entire novel.
Okay.
I describe it. I don't use the term. I'm describing it, but you get there. And it's not in the title at all.
Okay. I would say, first of all, NaNoWriMo, it's very useful because it gives people an artificial deadline. A lot of people don't complete work they start. And then, of course, it sits in the back of a drawer and never gets finished. The only thing is, if you publish immediately after November, the worst possible months for sales are January and February. So it really would be best to take a little longer and make sure your book is revised and of good quality, and then publish in a month when people actually buy books. As you must think a lot of them are for gifts, and people are only giving gifts at birthdays or Christmas on the whole. Okay, the other thing to consider if you're publishing after NaNoWriMo is if you're outside the US, the royalties year requires registration by September for March distribution. And there are 55 countries where royalties are collected by the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society, and 8 with the public lending right. So by having NaNoWriMo in November, it leaves quite a long time to register before September. And that's a useful stream of income because it continues for 70 years after the author's death. So even if you only get £100 or $120 a year, it can continue as a sort of pension for you. The other thing I'd say just before going through my main list is if anybody's considering using a pen name, that's no longer anonymous. So through copyright registration, people can find out who you are. Right, so onto the main list. Now, as I say, I'm a writer, so when I started writing down things to tell you, it just kind of kept going. So it's expansive. But if you have any questions, please flag them up, and I think Carly will break in. So the first thing to ask yourself is, why do you write? You know, what actually is motivating you? And for some people, it's a desire just to get what's inside of them out there so other people know about it. And for some people, it's something you want to promote. So it might be seasteading. You want the movement to do well. There could also be reasons of injustices you want to be known about, or a future development you want to predict, or maybe you've got insomnia, or the other reasons, of course, are personal, to be able to say, I am an author, or to leave a sort of legacy. The thing to take into account is that large publishing companies don't really care about any of those things. They're completely market-led. And that isn't really the best circumstance for fostering first-time authors. So if you're known already, they know that they can sell books and you're not a risk, but it's very difficult to break in. And this kind of leads you towards self-publishing, because if you self-publish and the book is taken on, people will have more confidence in perhaps giving you a future contract. So loss-making projects, it's very difficult to tempt the industry to do that. And I can say that having spoken to agents, because I was a book reviewer for a Sunday newspaper and met a lot of authors and talked to agents. And it really is quite cutthroat, because publishers do need to survive in the current market conditions where people simply aren't reading as much as they used to. Now, the best-selling genres are still romance and children's books. So I'm talking to people who perhaps through NaNoWriMo have already finished or are near finishing, but it's worth bearing in mind that the market is looking for those particular genres above others. If there's a fashionable topic, you sometimes have publishers asking you, could you write something that's a clone of this? And it might be teenage vampire books or whatever. But of course, you're never ever going to write anything original. And I find it's better to write what entertains yourself and hope that the market comes around to your way of thinking. And the good thing about books is now if you write something, it joins the cultural history of the human race. It won't be lost. So eventually fashion comes around to you. Most fiction books are sold to the 1% of the best established authors, past winners of major literary awards, and anything written or ghost written by someone who appears on television. That's a little bit depressing, because it gives you an idea of the challenge you face getting published for the first time. And also, well, this is a gross generalization, but publishers don't read speculative manuscripts sent to them by unpublished authors. They have a slush pile, which is sent to them mostly by literary agents. And if you can get signed by a literary agent, the chances of you being published in the mainstream are much higher, because if you're not going to get read, you're not going to get published. And that at least gives you the first step. The only thing is, if you are published in the mainstream, it might take 2 years before you see your book. It's a very slow feedback loop. If you don't have any of the advantages in the list I've just mentioned, then I think you might want to consider self-publishing, because it's guaranteed your book will be out there. I don't know if you've heard of the dandelion effect, but if you give away books cheaper, then they go to more people. They're read by more people. And the chance of one being picked up and recommended to a mainstream publisher or to become famous in its own right, and I'm thinking Christopher Paolini's book Aragon and G.P. Taylor's Shadowmancer series, then by making it widespread, those people became famous writers. And if they'd perhaps put their price up in the beginning, they wouldn't have had that possibility. So the problem with traditional publishing, as I see it, is that you give up creative control. You won't retain all the rights to your work either. So if you suddenly decided you'd like to make it a theatrical production, the publisher can veto you. And it's rather painful to find that you don't, your baby is now partly owned by someone else. With traditional publishing, the very obvious thing is you can't make any changes once it's been published. So if you say something which is wrong, or you have a great idea later, there's nothing you can do. Whereas with self-publishing, you can. The other issue I find a lot of authors don't like about traditional publishing is they're expected to do their own marketing work. And when you do a lot of promotional marketing, it takes time, and you might even completely stop being a writer in order to promote things that you've written in the past. Traditional publishers have also turned away good books, and the Harry Potter series being rejected by 12 publishing houses is an example of that. The advantages of traditional publishing, if you can get in, is you'll never need to pay for anything. And if ever anybody asks you to pay for anything in publishing, that is very likely to be a vanity press. And I would recommend that you don't continue with someone who's asking you to write checks as an author.
Can I ask a few questions?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so just going back to what you're talking about copyright, I believe Renee asked, does this apply just to the United States?
Yeah, well, the United States didn't join those programs, the ALCS and the PLR. Lots of countries have, and they collect money every time your book is borrowed, say from a library, that's public lending, right? Or if someone photocopies pages of your book. But I found, so I've also written novels and scripts which were published. And then the ALCS has said, oh yes, here's a check because someone performed it on the stage in Canada, or somebody took an excerpt of your book and used it for something else derivative in Portugal or Japan. And I didn't know these activities existed, but they've collected it. They wouldn't have been able to perhaps contact the author, but they do the work for you, and it's very helpful. But it only applies to you if your country is a signatory to that agreement. And as I say, ALCS is 55 countries out of about 197 in the world. So it isn't covering everybody. But of course, some countries will have their own systems, so it is worth looking into that. But I think the US doesn't have either of those.
Renee, did you want to follow up? Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I just was wondering, so is that more in Europe then? I was trying to figure out where in.
Well, I'd say Google it, but certainly the UK, Ireland, most of the Commonwealth countries, Canada, and I think parts of Asia are all collecting royalties as part of that agency agreement.
So Kenya, South Africa, yes, but the United States, no.
Yeah. So what happens when you publish a book is you get income for about 2 years, and then it peters out. The world forgets about it. The royalties will continue for a very long time. So there's a book I published in 2008, and I'm still getting royalties from it. It's no longer topical. I wouldn't buy it, but it continues.
And then a few more questions. Is there a way to keep your pen name anonymous?
In real terms, I don't think so. If somebody wanted to, say, start legislation against you for defamation, they can find who you are, yes.
And then what can you tell us about Creative Commons instead of copyright from Sandy?
Yeah, well, Creative Commons is great, but it is essentially giving away your work for free. Somebody can copy it. They can use, actually, I think there are levels on Creative Commons, but they can use part of your work in their work without necessarily asking your permission. There's usually a line at the bottom of the Creative Commons agreement saying, please attribute this to me if you use it. So it is great for the dandelion effect, you get out there, but if somebody uses your work and doesn't say where it came from, there's very little you can do.
And when you say children, do you mean elementary school children or children under 21?
Well, children, you're really looking at gifts. So where people, aunts, uncles buy a book as a present for a child, just think, at what age would you stop buying presents for your nephew, niece?
And then from Martin, the main drawback of self-publishing in my single experience is that the number of copies I sold was near zero. I gave away more copies than I sold. I'd like to put in on Thursday, December 8th, we're going to have a workshop with author Kate Beret. She's been making a living as a self-published author for a few years now. And so she will talk in detail about how to market and set up your business as a self-publishing author. But Adam, if you had anything to share about that, please share.
Yeah, I do know a few people who've done that and are successful, but be very strict with your writing time and your promotional time, because if you're going to have a YouTube channel, say, that talks about books and you are promoting yourself as an author you can buy a book from, if the channel takes over, you stop being an author. Okay, I should probably get back to the list, or this will be going on for about 3 hours. Okay, right, so advantages. The publisher obviously has an awful lot of experience, so if they try to advise you on rewriting your book or developing the plot, try not to react adversely. People are very protective of their own work. I found it very difficult with scripts when someone said, oh no, you need to cut out all this exposition. Why don't you just have this? And editing, cutting away your own material is very difficult. But publishers are experienced in what their audience is looking for, and you should really listen to them. If you're going through the self-published route, clearly this isn't applicable. One other thing about publishing houses is they'll produce a very tight copy, a very tight book. Now, there are some things, so this is a self-published one, but sometimes when print-on-demand presses are overheating, you get curl of the cover. This doesn't ever seem to happen with publishing houses. So that is a risk you can eliminate. The second thing, of course, is publishing houses have established supply chains to stock bookshops internationally. The only advantage with self-publishing that can equal that is, unfortunately, if you go through mega bookshops like Amazon who have supply chains. But if you go through small press self-publishing, how are you going to get it into the hands of the reader? It's very difficult. Mainstream publishers also do your book network mapping. So have you ever seen expressions like, if you like this book, you'll love this book? Well, if you join something like Goodreads, you can set that up. You register your title and it says which books are like yours, and you can set a map. And when somebody likes one of those books, they then recommend yours. The mainstream publisher will do that for you. You don't have to think about it. They also carry out your obligation to send copies to national libraries. Now, this also will change from region to region, but where I am, you have to send 2 copies for archiving in the National Library. It's a legal requirement. If your book is quite expensive, obviously that's cutting into your profits, but a mainstream publisher would do that. The publisher buys and assigns ISBN codes, so hopefully everybody will have encountered those. But if you are self-publishing, you either buy your own, or if you go through KDP, they assign one for you. Now, there's a problem with if KDP assign an ISBN to you, they have a slightly different code. And when you go to register it for royalties, sometimes that isn't accepted because it isn't in the correct format. So it may be worth it to buy your own ISBN so that you get royalties which are more than the ISBN every year. Now, let me see. So I was just going to look at what's changed in the industry. There have been monopolies in the past where books have either been made available by originally religions, then centers of learning, then publishing companies, and finally buyers for bookshop chains. They've more or less decided what gets published and what doesn't. And that's very top down, and the authors were at their mercy. They could just decide, no, this isn't the sort of thing. But it, of course, could have artistic value. And there have been 7 changes in our lifetime. The first one was word processing at home, which I'm sure you're all using. Second was tools to make publishing easy. And now markets to find freelance support. So when you want editors or cover designers, you can get them quite cheaply without any kind of middleman. The final thing is the public review books. So you don't have to go to a professional reviewer who works for a literary magazine or a newspaper. Anybody can read a book and has the right to publish a review. And there's no industry gatekeeper on that now. So apart from if you, so most publishers like KDP won't publish offensive material, but otherwise there's no gatekeeper. You can publish anything you like and you're free. So I've mentioned, hang on, here we are. There are some negatives with self-publishing. You don't just write the book. There's still the editing, formatting, spelling, grammar, legal checks, which need to be done either by yourself or by somebody you subcontract. So your cost could be 0 if you do all of that, as I do. So you can produce an Amazon KDP book and get it out there for sale without paying anybody anything. Actually, cover art I would pay something for, but otherwise, if there are you're not confident about your skills in any of those areas, then it's going to cost something for you to publish. So investing in a high quality cover, yes, good idea, but decide your book's dimensions first. So when you look at a self-publishing template, which are available online, the artist would need to know, first of all, if you're publishing all 3 panels, the back, front, and spine, with art, or whether it's just the front, and what the dimensions are, because you don't want to produce, say, a square picture and then find that a letterbox shape cuts out the top and bottom. So plan ahead and decide on the size of your boards. So for freelancing sites, Fiverr and People Hour, I think, are the leading ones. You may know of others. The good thing about those sites is there's feedback from previous customers of that artist or editor or freelancer. when your book is uploaded to KDP, you'll be required to choose a business model, whether you give a complete monopoly of sales to the Amazon company, which means a higher profit margin for you, or whether to choose expanded distribution, which goes to bookshops worldwide, but you get a smaller profit margin. And some of Amazon's marketing services are completely dependent on selling through Amazon. Now, I've mentioned curling covers on paperbacks, but production values can vary. If you order a batch of books when you first publish through KDP, so they're sent from Amazon, they're usually very good quality. If you're in the regions and it's published on a different print-on-demand machine, then of course you can have a variation. Now let me see. Amazon KDP state that they reject manuscripts which have already been published by a different company. So if you're an author with a back catalogue, and perhaps some of those have gone out of print, as one of mine has, I'd like to publish that on KDP, but it's already been published. So watch out for that. You might actually think I could have a whole set identical, but no, it's blocked. Now, Amazon KDP also requires all authors to register for US withholding or income tax on sales, even if they're not in the US and don't pay US income tax, and none of their books are bought in the US. So if you are in the US, that's fine. But if you're in another country, you might find you have to sign an agreement for something where you're being taxed for something which is irrelevant to you. I would say also, perhaps some of you think that being a self-published author historically has been a bit of a put down, as if it's only read by your family and friends. But unless somebody is genuinely a bad author, this should no longer be true. The last ebook I was involved with had 5,200 downloads from strangers in 30 days. And that's really word of mouth. Somebody started reading, they've liked it, they've told their friends, and it's done well. And 5,200 downloads compared to an author who's published and mainstream and had their book in the bookshop, it compares very favorably. So I wouldn't necessarily think that the way the market is moving, or the way the publishing model is moving, is something that you should hang your head about. So if you do choose to go with Amazon KDP, templates are provided for all book sizes that can be printed on demand. And I'll give you an example of, so these are hardbacks, but this one, these are academic journal papers, that's traditional publishing. And now we've moved to print on demand, where you have a high quality book, which when you compare it to the traditional publisher's book, you can't really identify the difference. So you'll mostly be looking at paperbacks, but KDP do provide hardbacks as well. That particular one was published through Sheridan, who are a separate business. But the temptation when you're choosing a template is to choose a large page size, perhaps to keep your production cost, the per page cost down, but also to have wonderful cover art that's very obvious to all. But remember, of course, that cover curling problem. Smaller templates seem to work better, and also matte seems to work better than gloss. That's from my experience. Obviously, it's a small sample group, but I would caution against having, well, that's a particularly large page size, and production values, I think, suffered because of it. Now, the other thing is the author can choose their own font style and size. For inclusiveness, people usually think fonts which are accessible to people with dyslexia, such as having no serifs, would be an advantage. So that's things like Arial, Calibri, Trebuchet, Verdana. But some of those might look a bit amateur. If you see it in your work correspondence all the time, and then you see it in a book, you think, oh, okay, perhaps it's just run off the photocopier. It's not very professional. The proportion of people with dyslexia in the population is said to be 20%, but a smaller fraction of dyslexics read novels than people who don't have dyslexia. So it is not 20% of the audience buying books. So bear that in mind. Pros and cons of fonts. You don't want it very hard to read. The publisher Colin Smythe, who published people like Terry Pratchett, has a favorite font, American Uncial, from 1943, and it's fairly hard to read. You wouldn't have a whole book published in American Uncial, but Lord of the Rings then used it, and suddenly it's very popular. So with self-publishing, you can, of course, choose a monochrome book, or you can have color illustrations. Your costs will change if you switch to color. The other thing is to check on the quality of your, so the figures you put into a book need to be fairly good resolution. Now, I've mentioned you can issue in hardback, paperback, ebook, or all three. It won't cost you any different to publish in 3 formats compared to 1. So I would say you might as well do that. You can set your price with self-publishing, which is something the mainstream publisher would have always done for you. So you can decide based on your priorities whether you want to set it low to reach the most people possible or high to receive the most income possible. If you're sure people will buy it, yes, you can start moving the price tag up. You can also realize that you've made a mistake with the pricing, and you can go back in and change it again. I've mentioned if an error is discovered in your manuscript, or if you've, say, mentioned somebody who didn't want to be mentioned, you can correct your original and re-upload it and replace what's there. So that's an advantage which print on demand produces. There are perhaps only 4 copies on a shelf somewhere with print on demand for the next 4 customers. So if you change your electronic manuscript, after those 4 copies are gone, everything in future will be the corrected version. KDP can automatically convert your paperback to a Kindle compatible ebook. So it does that work for you. You can control digital rights management on your ebook. If you did want your book to go viral, if you're that confident it would, I would say don't put digital rights management on it. Then people can, say, buy a copy and they can give it to a friend. And perhaps if you've got more books in your back catalogue, that's 2 people who might buy them. So Amazon is the largest bookshop in the world now, and giving them exclusive rights to sell is not particularly limiting because they will reach the English language markets. They just aren't going to reach independent bookstores. If you choose to make your book available on Kindle Unlimited, which Kindle users subscribe to and then read for free, you get paid per page that they read. So if somebody starts reading your book and doesn't like it, yes, you'll see perhaps that they read 13 pages. If they do like it, you'll get hundreds of page reads per month, and you're not getting paid, but they might want the physical copy. If they particularly like your book, they might want it on the shelf, and then they buy the paperback. There is something called the Kindle Worldwide Fund. So this is money which is collected by the per page read system, but it only goes to the highest performing authors. And really that's your Stephen King's. It doesn't go to independent authors as far as I can see. So I was involved in a short story collection here, which was ranked #1 in the world in certain categories and didn't get a penny from the Kindle Worldwide Fund. So yeah, you're not allowed to price your KDP ebook at 0, except on certain promotional days. Now, sometimes people would like to publish it at no cost to attract followers, because if you, say, have a mailing list of followers and you have a new book promotion, these people are partly on your side before you tell them about the new book. KDP will allow you to do a 5-day promotion, reducing the cost down, but it's really better to coincide that with some marketing. If KDP are told that your book is being sold cheaper by a different retailer, they match the price. So if you gave away your book on a website, you could tell KDP, report yourself for giving it away free, and then they would change your price to nothing. So useful trick. I don't think I'd try that myself, but people have. The other good thing about self-publishing is there are reporting tools, and traditional publishing has a very, very slow feedback loop. You don't know you've been successful for at least a year. With ebooks and KDP, you will see reports for book sales in all formats and global territories with only a 24-hour time lag. So you can say, how am I doing this week in Christmas sales? You can look it up and there it is. They're changing the reporting system, I think, slightly. So some will be the old format report and some will be the new, but you just need to get your head around that. You can publish with KDP almost immediately. So this will be any self-publishing company, I'm sure, allowing perhaps 24 hours for the upload to be approved. Now, the approval is mostly formatting. They're not reading your book. It's better, though, to not publish immediately. And the reason is sometimes there are mistakes which you don't see on screen, but you do see when you are holding that paper copy. So if you upload and then generate an author's proof copy and have it posted to you, it might take 10 or 12 days for it to arrive, but you can check it. You can read the physical book and see the layout, the consistency, before anybody else buys a copy and is disappointed. So in my experience, there's always an error somewhere, and you can fix it with a physical copy. So I've just noted a couple of lists of, a list of a few common errors. One of those is, do you know what a running header is on the book? At the top, it will say something like this chapter on one side. So perhaps the name of the book on one side and the name of the chapter on the other. Well, those need to be a consistent distance from the page edge, top and sides. So if you wrote to the page edge and were unsure where your bleed margin was when it's published, you do really need to see the paper copy so that you can see if it's the same throughout the book, the same distance from the edge, and also that it's not right up to a margin and perhaps cutting through a letter. Similarly, paragraph indentations. You're not writing this book in one go. You're writing a chapter, coming back 2 weeks later, writing some more. And indentations for paragraphs, because there isn't a gap between paragraphs, there's just an indentation, need to be the same throughout the book. Some readers are really extremely vindictive and would give a bad book review for something that simple. So try to look for consistency.
You're saying be careful of typesetting snafus. Make sure your indentation is right, your paragraphs are clear, section breaks within chapters, or they will absolutely clobber you.
They will. Take a look at some online book reviews. People say things like, "Oh, I just can't read this. I've given up after 3 pages, 1 star." Now, a lot of people's first chapter isn't great, and then they find their voice as they go through the book. They aren't reaching the point where you find your voice because they gave up because of an irritation. So yes, watch out for it. And also there are, after you publish, there are vindictive reviews. Sometimes you've just got to swallow it. One book published during lockdown had a review of 1 star, and in the review they admitted they had not read the book. They just said, I looked at the index, there's nothing, so book of short stories, there's nothing here I particularly want to read, so I'm saying the book is bad. How can you cope with these people? The other thing is, so I was going to cover it later on, but as it's come up, be consistent about writing in US English or UK English. Don't mix those up, because people will give your book 1 star saying that, oh, this uses ISE spellings or IZE spellings, so it's 1 star. So imagine just how nasty that is to say, if someone said all American books are bad because they're written in American English, you know, that's insane. But people are like that. So just whichever version you're going to use, stick to it. Don't mix them up. Okay. Now let me see, where was I up to? So also page numbering. Now, on particularly a template, when you start a new chapter, check the page numbering hasn't started at 1 again. If you just wrote your full manuscript and then put the chapters in later, you would find after every section break, the numbering continues. But with the stop-start of templates, you have to check for that because it can mess you up completely. The other thing is so sequential we've covered, and preliminary pages are usually in Roman numerals. But when your pages are open, when you've opened the book like that, sorry, the numbers, so check the numbers are consistently the same and the same distance from the edges. I've got the left page, the number top left, and the right page, the number top right. You may do it differently, such as having it centered at the bottom, but make sure you aren't mixing and matching those styles. So let me see, right-hand side of page, odd numbers, and alternating left-right. So you'll be able to see that in where, if you're using Word, in your page numbering section, test it, print it, and make sure that left and right are appearing in the same place. Because clearly if it's left, left, then right, it's going to be disturbed. And another thing I'd say watch out for, so I'm guilty of this myself and managed to spot it before it went any further. But if you notice that a phrase used by one character, a particular unusual phrase like, oh, really, boss, is said by 3 or 4 characters as well as that character, the common factor is that the author is the same for all those characters. But you do need to differentiate. And quite often you'll see that a character's particular idiosyncrasy is repeated by someone else who they've never met before. Just be aware. Paragraphs in prose script should not have a blank line between them. So I've mentioned consistent indentations. The first line of a chapter doesn't necessarily need an indentation. Some people do it and some don't. But again, check for consistency.
Question about the prose. You said there should be blank lines between what again? Yeah. The paragraphs or between
no. So
lines?
if you wrote a script, one character would speak and then there would be a complete blank line on a final draft or word before the next character speaks. If you are writing a fiction novel, then you need to close up those paragraphs. Publishing's changed because for example, when people originally went to secretarial college, they'd have 2 spaces after every full stop or period. Now, over the course of, say, a 400-page book, that's a lot of pages that you have to unnecessarily print. So double spacing became single spacing. And it's the same with closing up paragraphs, trying to keep them together. So some authors don't even start a new page for a new paragraph. They just have a couple of asterisks or something, and then continue a new paragraph, perhaps on the same, new chapter, perhaps on the same page.
So you're saying keep the dialogue so that it's all one neat transaction, start, beginning, and end, so that it's clear who's saying what to whom. Okay.
Just think, if you add unnecessary space to a novel, you're cutting into your profit, or you're charging the reader more, and that's for empty space. So just to be aware, if you were, for example, publishing poetry, you might want plenty of space around something because you want it to stand out and be emphasized. But for fiction, close it up and keep the cost down. Okay, so if you justify your text, that's another issue. You can visually have distancing problems on Word. I think WordPerfect altered spaces between individual characters, but Word doesn't. And if you use long words, and particularly if you have a small template page size with, say, only 6 words per line, you might find these enormous gaps. So remember to hyphenate to get rid of some of those gaps on your final template. Don't hyphenate until you've finished, because when you go back and add something to a paragraph, it pushes everything along, and those hyphens might then become placed in the middle of sentences. So work through, once you've finished, to try and eliminate some of those gaps in lines. The other issue is global replace in Word documents. Don't global replace and change 100 things at once, because say you want to alter the word and, it appears in other words like Andrew. So you need to go through one by one laboriously, find the next instance and alter that, because once you've written a book, usually you're quite sick of it. You don't want to go back and read the whole thing again. And the word cat appears in concatenation. You know, it's things you'd never guess. So be careful. Now let me see. For self-publishing, authors, when they've completed their Word document, would normally save it to PDF to upload. But actually there are different types of PDF, and there's one that's specific to publishing because it doesn't have layers, it flattens things. So if you go to Adobe Acrobat and then PDF Standards, which is one of the tool applications within Acrobat, there's an option called Pre-Flight, and Pre-Flight checks it to make sure everything is ready and in the correct condition to convert to a publishable file. If you then save as PDFX, select the subformat 1A, so PDFX 1A, and it will check for errors. And one of those errors might be that some of your figure files are in RGB colors and they need to be CMYK. And it will convert the document, and you will have a PDFX 1A file, which can then be uploaded for publication. And KDP should accept that without spitting it back to you at the approval stage. When you have your PDF ready, open File, Edit, and Security Properties to enter your metadata. This is because if you publish as an ebook, and you might publish as a paperback and decide to convert it to an ebook later, you do need your author name on that product. So your metadata would have author, date, who published it, and your copyright statement. Now, you can copy a generic copyright statement online. Some people would like to keep full rights to their own work. Some people would like to give it away by Creative Commons. Put it in the file, and then there's no doubt that if somebody used your work for a derivative activity, they can't say, I didn't know, because it's embedded in it. So sometimes, and I've seen this before, you put out an ebook and a site will try and resell it. So they're selling your hard work for their profit. So your metadata would include also a statement on the secondary use of your material, whether it's allowed or not, and who to contact if they're asking permission. And the great thing about that is found with, particularly with things like scripts, somebody will contact you and ask to use your material for something you wouldn't have thought possible. And you'll suddenly find what you've written's in a computer game, something like that. So make sure that they can contact you if they need to just put those offers to you.
What was that second metadata type? You said secondary use, or?
Yeah, secondary use of your material is, so what I'm kind of a fan for publishing in different formats. So I'll write something as, say, a radio script, and then think, oh, actually, that would make a really good book, and then write it up again. Someone else can do that as well. They can think, do you know, this would convert very well to a different form of media, like, I don't know, a stage or screen or cartoons or something perhaps not invented yet. And can they just take it and use it, or do they need to check with you, or do they need to establish how much money you would want for your intellectual property? So secondary use is someone else making further use of what you've written. And you might find with seasteading that there are people who would like to promote seasteading, or they have a product which they would like to be further distributed, and you've written something terribly poetic and they would like to use it in their marketing. So that would be an example of secondary use. Now, yeah, with an ebook, another thing you will have to do is hyperlink the chapters in the contents list to the actual chapters in the book. Now, there are two ways to do this. One is in Word, and when the Word document is converted to PDF and uploaded to KDP, those links are normally preserved. Alternatively, you can hyperlink contents and chapter items in PDFs directly. They do have a sort of a choice between a dotted or invisible box around the click area. But if you go to the link icon, add and edit a web link, mark that rectangle, choose how it looks, scroll to the destination page, so chapter 3, and click OK, then even if you've forgotten to put it in the Word document, you can put it directly into the PDF document. Okay, I was going to move on to the marketing part of the discussion, but are there any questions that you'd like to raise at that point? No, okay, I can move on. Many countries, when you're thinking about marketing, think about how many people to reach. Many countries have a national curriculum for their schools, and many of those national curriculums include a list of words which they make freely available, which children need to learn in that stage of their education. If you use all of those words in your book, you can market it to school libraries as educational material. So just think how many schools there are around, and they've all got a budget. So that's a useful tip, and one that I don't necessarily follow, but I know people that do that every single time. Now, I've mentioned the 5 free days a year when you can give away your book, your ebook, for free. You can also coincide the giveaway with paid-for book promotion services. Some of those are just making money from authors, and some do have a realistic field and audience that they market to. So perhaps check online and see which are recommended by other authors. If you give away as a promotion the first book in a 3-book series, people who like it will often come back and buy the other 2 books. So you're not necessarily giving something for free, you're building an audience who will come back, and then when you write the next one in the series, they'll look out for it. So if you are giving away a book for free, when that free ebook promotion ends, don't discount the paperback, because the people who've read the ebook will then consider buying your paperback. And perhaps that's the bit that covers your promotional costs. KDP also, this is a recent addition, allows you to nominate a book to be considered as a free book to Kindle readers. So when people first go to, say, download the Kindle app or have a handheld device, they can look up perhaps science fiction, and there are 15, 20 books which they can have for free. If you do that, you are reaching a lot of people that would not have heard of you otherwise. They're not necessarily great books, and you might nominate your book and it doesn't get taken up, but it doesn't cost you anything to do that. If you have, say, 5 books, you can only nominate 1, but worth looking at. There's a website called Goodreads, which I think is also owned by Amazon, which is free to join as an author, and you can register your book and do the book map. They will, let me see, Goodreads will recommend for you other books like yours to people who liked your book. The only thing is, if you say my book is like Life of Pi, so many people have said that your book won't get recommended. So it's best to be completely honest and say my book is like something specialist, and you're in an ideal field with seasteading because you can recommend other seasteading books and they can recommend yours. And if you have a seasteading genre that's interdependent, you're going to form a whole seasteading canon quite quickly. It will just take 1 or 2 books to be widely read for the others to get picked up. One thing I did think about with seasteading as a genre, if at the back of every seasteading novel you just listed the other seasteading novels, if everyone did that, then you would see a very good promotional cycle develop. Now, let me see. Goodreads does offer a giveaway service for books, and this is good and bad, really. Participation for giving away, I think, paperbacks, but possibly paperbacks and ebooks, is only available to authors in the US region. So unless they open that up, or unless they've opened it up recently, it's only an advantage to you if you're in the US. But if you wanted to generate interest and give away, say, 100 or so books in an electronic raffle, and these are to people who read books. So the whole website has selected in favor of people who read regularly. It's not just people who say, oh, something for free, I'll have it.
How do they tell? How do they tell if you're a U.S. author or not? Are they looking at your geolocated IP address, or are they looking at something else? Because that seems like a VPN away to fix that.
Yeah. So if I went to do that, they would look at where my IP address is located. They'd say, you're outside of the region. We can't offer this service to you yet, and yet has lasted for several years. But if your IP address is in the US, I think you go straight through. With the buzz, it's not just the 100 people who win the raffle that are interested in your book. Perhaps 2,000 people might join the raffle, might want to be in it. And that creates a kind of mailing list of people who like your subject. which is made available to you after the raffle. So you've now got a circulation list to promote with. People on Goodreads leave star ratings, so you will get an average rating for your book. Now, there are some reviewing companies which won't even look at your book unless it has, say, over 50 ratings above a certain number of stars. And this is one way to reach that point where you're taken seriously by people in the next level up. The other thing is Amazon. Be sure to set keywords to categorize your novel on Amazon, because some people aren't browsing by the name of the book. They're browsing by a specific subgenre. You can get a list, I don't have this at the moment, but you can browse for it online, of the most popular book subcategories looked up in Amazon. And then you can adjust your metadata so that you aren't choosing keywords in a subgenre that nobody buys. It's going to take a little bit of research to get that right, but once you start, I'm sure you'll continue doing that each time to make sure when somebody searches, your book has a better chance of popping up. Here's something I would say don't use with Amazon, and it's a paid-for reviewing service they offer called Amazon Vine. The reviewers are very, very unlikely to be interested in your product because a lot of reviewers join Amazon Vine. They say, I'm available to review because they want free electronic consumables. If they're allocated a book to review, well, they aren't interested in your subject, or at least it's a diminishingly small possibility that they are. It's much better to have a review from somebody who sought your subject out, because they're more likely to leave a favorable review or engage with what you've said. One of the best ways for a self-published author to promote their book is by attracting book reviews, but be careful, because there are a lot of wolves out there who realize authors will pay them to get more reviews. So you want to try and avoid these people, but there will be a lot of them. So if you pay somebody to review your book, they're probably going to be a flatterer, which will make your review quite unlikely. People won't believe it. And it's fairly meaningless if you get feedback that you've paid for, because you don't know if your own book is good or bad. It's probably better to have the truth. There is a service called Kirkus Reviews, and it is really expensive, but they do have professional reviewers, and if your book is bad, they will say so. And if your book is good, they will say so, and people will believe them, and the industry will believe them. So that's an exception to the rule, but like vanity publishing, there are vanity reviewers, and they're just there to make money from authors, so please try and avoid that. Goodreads is the best place I've found for reviews because it's heavily used by genuine readers of novels, and people follow genres, so they have discussion groups where they will talk about the latest books in a particular genre. If you, as an author, join those discussion groups, you will find many other authors there. And it's quite useful for picking up tips and also putting yourself out there and saying, I write, these are my books, are you interested? The top 100 reviewers on Amazon or Goodreads are usually uncontactable. So if you wanted to send a copy to them, you'd find you don't know their address. And the reason they're in the top 100 is usually because they receive pre-publication novels, like proof copies, from large publishing houses. So they're not looking at self-publishing independent authors. So look for active reviewers who are not in the top 100. you might, if you join a website like that, not just that, but I'm sure there are others, think you could have an arrangement with other authors to all give yourself glowing reviews and the top star rating, but you will usually find that those sites ban that. You're not able to do it. They will take down your review. So don't suggest on Goodreads forum you'd like somebody to review your book and you'll review theirs. Be quite careful about what you say, as you don't want your good reviews to be taken down, particularly not if it's an absolute genuine good review and they veto it. So it's not an endorsement, but the book promotion services, leading ones I found are BookBub, Free Booksy, Bargain Booksy, BookSense, The Fussy Librarian, but there are also several which only deal with a particular genre. So there are ones that just do sci-fi or just do zombies. And they've already compiled a list of people who are interested in your subject. Seasteading is new, but say sailing writing or fiction about adventure, these are very old topics and they may be a sublist. The author pays them to promote the book to their mailing list. And of course, you're not getting a review from everybody, and also the service might say, oh, we reach 100,000 people. Take that with a pinch of salt. They don't reach the numbers they claim very often, but they'll reach enough that you start getting reviews trickling in. And a good review from a stranger will really make your day. So perhaps worth a go, but coincide it with the free giveaways and you'll get even more reach. I would say don't respond to book reviews online because it makes you sound dislikable. So if somebody leaves you a 1-star rating, or just get over it. Just say, okay, some people don't like my subject. But if you start a fight, it puts other people off. The other thing is, don't be humble and leave a 0-star rating. Just leave it blank. I'm not going to rate my own book, but I will talk about it. So I'll leave, what I think, but I won't leave a star, because it takes a 0 rating as part of the calculation when it divides. So you are torpedoing your own book, lowering your average, really. Some writers have set up their own websites talking about books. It's good to seek these things out, as they usually want to fill up content, and they'll do author interview spots. So they would send you written questions and you return the answers just as text plus a profile photo, and they put it on a website which has readers. So that costs you nothing. You're also part of a sort of writing community where authors learn from each other's experiences. If you write, and so my daughter wrote a short story which was published in a literary journal and got nominated for something in the US called the Pushcart Prize. Now, this is an annual prize of the best independent published work. You don't nominate yourself, but if you took a chapter from your novel and sent it to a journal that submits to the Pushcart Prize, you might find that's your springboard into a full-time, perhaps even writing career. So don't miss opportunities like that. Now I'd like to talk about other formats. You've perhaps written a novel, so a fiction text novel, but you've done the hard work, you've done that work once. It's only a conversion job to get it released in other media formats. So the first step to ask yourself, I found, is whether your writing is visual or verbal, as this signposts you to the best media format that you should do next with that story. So a way to think about this is, if there's perhaps a movie you remember fondly, Do you remember it because of a great quotable line or because of something that's happened visually? So an example was Die Hard. There's a line where somebody compliments the tailor of the antagonist, and he replies, oh yes, this suit is from so-and-so, Gaddafi gets his there. And it defines the character because they know that that antagonist wants to be like someone bad. But also people remember the film Die Hard from somebody falling down the lift. And whether your writing is witty wordplay or very visual and graphic, pushes you towards your next format. So left brain authors write a high proportion of dialogue. So that's, I'm a left brain author. If your novel's like that, it would be really easy to convert to an audiobook or a radio script. As a former radio writer, you can see in what I write, there's so much dialogue. Now, right brain authors write a high proportion of description. So if your novel's like that, if you're like Mervyn Peake, you should look at screenplay format or distilling it into a theatrical play with very impactful scenes, but obviously fewer descriptions. Less dialogue and more scenes. So the choreography of the piece. If you can do both, that's ideal, but you have to do more work to convert it to the different media options because it's not already in an aligned style. Remember though, and I can tell you this from websites like Shooting People, where you get to meet filmmakers. Filmmakers are usually exclusively right-brained thinkers. They don't place as much value on words or on writers as the population on average would do. So you might think it's a generalization, but when directors choose to write, so they get 2 credits, the quantity and quality of wordplay is much lower than it would be with a professional writer, but they don't notice because they don't value it as highly as the imagery. So I've mentioned script templates are available free to download online. One of the resources is the BBC website, and I'd say don't necessarily join BBC Talent, but use the resources like the templates. Otherwise, the leading paid-for software for script writing is called Final Cut. There are things you can join where you get Final Cut at a discount. So I don't know of anybody who's ever paid full price for that software. You could hire a freelancer who has industry acceptable software for screenwriting and convert the script. But then, of course, that's cutting into your profit to pay somebody else to do it. There are many freelance sites where you can find audiobook actors and inexpensive sound editors. So they would perhaps sound edit a short story for £20, which is nothing. Very good work. They could be anywhere in the world, and they've usually got very quick turnover. If you are recording an audiobook, it's best to record at least 1 character yourself, because in a novel you might have 20 different voices. And if you can narrow those down, you wouldn't be employing as many actors. So you need a quality USB microphone, and an example of that, that's my one. And the audio quality is so much better, and because of course it's digital, you can download free editing software online, and you can take out the pauses, or when people say ah, and or perhaps are inaudible, you need to record another take to edit into an existing speech just to clean it up. And I found that I'm an amateur with sound engineering, but was able to do that quite easily. It's very easy to self-teach yourself, to be self-taught. And I think Shotcut is a very easy to use, intuitive editing software. There are many others, I'm sure, but that's one I've used. Once you've written your book, if you convert it to audio, you can put it onto a YouTube channel for nothing. You can have a short story channel, talking books. You can choose whether to have advertising income or not. And you can get a lot of free listeners. Those people might then go and buy your book and give it to somebody. You can use a paid-for service like ProvidGate to promote your audio story to other YouTube listeners. So this is a YouTube partner. So you set a budget and they place adverts in front of people who are, according to their algorithm, more likely to be interested in your story. With a seasteading genre, you could actually have a loop of recommendation without paying the other service, because at the end credits of your video, you can set which story it goes to next. And it might be one of yours, it might be one of your colleagues. So nearing the end, adapting, we have to also consider translation. Now, which language you translate to is the big question, because the major global languages, English, Cantonese, and Spanish, will of course have a lot of readers. You might want to translate it to a language which perhaps you know, or you know a translator for, but perhaps has a lower per capita population reading books for pleasure. So they might read training manuals for work, but do they actually read novels for pleasure? So again, you will need to research it. If you know somebody who's bilingual, it's always worth asking them. If you don't, you can go to a freelance site and open a job for bidding. You can award the gig to the person to translate perhaps one page, and then check that with a fluent speaker of the language to see how well it flows. Because before awarding a gig or a full manuscript, you need to know whether it's readable. It's best, I've found, to give people in translation the freedom to make a loose translation. And that's because translating word for word doesn't always sit well in other languages, not in grammatical structures. So don't auto-translate your text through Google Translate and send it to a native speaker for cleaning up, unless you also send them the full English text to refer to, because some things don't always make sense literally.
Do you find that it's actually useful to give credit to the translators, since effectively they're having to rewrite in this loose form?
Yeah.
Do they have to share kind of the spotlight as effectively co-authors?
You can have an agreement. You can have an agreement at the beginning that they don't own any part of the work, and you can decide whether to credit them. It is good to credit them because they will use that product to say, this is an example of the work I've done. And again, they're putting your work out to people who would have never encountered it before. So if you're not particularly possessive about your work, it might go further. Oh, sorry, farther. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, it's a good idea, if it is possible, to find a translator who is a writer of some kind themselves, or possibly even a songwriter, but a literature student in their own language who has interest in writing can retain the meaning of your work, but play with the words and form to make the sentences natural and melodious instead of clunky. And once completed, you might want to send more of the translated work to a native speaker to ask them to check it. And then, of course, with uploading to YouTube or even with print on demand, you can change things retrospectively. You can edit them. So if something wasn't explained properly or it had the wrong meaning in translation, you can still fix it. And with traditional releasing on a CD or a film, a DVD, or paperback print, once it's out there, you can't change it. So a mistranslation would be a problem. It doesn't have to be. So on to the final point of my very long spiel, legacy. Now, when you think about the main reasons why you decided to write your book, probably you didn't go into it for money, because this is no longer a highly profitable area. That's kind of superficial, but you might have started writing because you wanted people to like your work. That's very good. They won't always like your work immediately, but what you write now will be around for the next 10,000 years. So consider that, first of all, as I said earlier, fashion might come round to you, but also your distant descendants might want to see what thoughts and feelings and ideas were in your mind, the distant ancestor they had. And it might be as far back as, wondering what somebody related to you thought in the Paleolithic period. It might be that kind of distance in future when they discover you. And it would be great to, when you die, not completely disappear from the record of the human race, to actually have the opportunity to record that amount of content and to make it permanent for people to discover. So there are famous painters like Van Gogh who didn't sell a picture in their lifetime and were discovered later. And as an independent writer or a self-published writer, I think that's a very good reason to be self-published. And if you don't have a lot of sales in your first 2 years, don't worry about it. That's the first 2 years of a very long period. And if we have cities on the ocean, which I'm sure it's going to come to pass, you will be there in the beginning of that. You'll be, from an American perspective, you'll be one of that circle of founding fathers or founding mothers, and your work won't be forgotten. People will return to it and say, wow, they really predicted the future. So think of that, think of legacy, and don't necessarily be put off if your first attempt at publishing isn't an immediate success. That, I think, is all I had to say. So if there's anyone who would like to ask anything else or for clarifications, please do let me know.
Thank you, Adam. Anyone, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question or have a comment. I know we have a couple of published authors here, so if you wanted to add a comment, it'd be great to hear from you as well.
Just a quick comment that it can be useful to work as a paid writer so that you have income while you're writing what you want to write. So I've earned over $1 million as a writer, but it was all writing computer technical manuals as either a contractor or an employee. And I have earned essentially nothing from my writing of newspaper columns, think tank pieces, and that one self-published book. So it is a way to make money writing while you wait for your breakthrough.
Yeah, I'd agree. The ALCS had a survey of authors in the UK to find out what their average income was, and it was £6,000. So people can't live on that. And if you aren't in that top 1 or 2%, it is best to have a day job, which is what I do, and then write partly to entertain yourself, but as a hobby, market it and see if it takes off. If it doesn't take off, you don't starve. So yes, I'd agree with that.
Have you ever did a translation into Braille, language for those who are unsighted? That's something I've experienced with.
It's a fabulous idea. I've not done that personally. So certainly I've translated, well, with the 5D data crystal, books into permanent form that will outlast the human race. So that's into a form from which a book can be extracted. But if you can reach wider audiences, that's brilliant. And the other thing, of course, is there are a lot of people who would like large print for one reason or another. So you could produce a normal, say, 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 point font version of your novel, but you might also want to produce a graphic novel or a large print novel. If you did Braille as well, fantastic, give it a go, and certainly let others know how you did. What sort of audience are you reaching? And was there any feedback about improvement? And if it works, I'm sure more people would follow.
If there's no more questions, thank you, Adam, so much for joining us. I want to remind everyone to please fill out our feedback form. I'm going to share the link in the chat. In the feedback form, you can obviously tell us what you thought of this event, but also recommend topics for future Seasteading Social events. And then our next event is on Thursday, December 8th, coming up right away, to be about the business side of being a self-published author. So that is with author Kate Gray, and I'll put the link so that you can RSVP for that in the chat. And I hope to see you all there as well. I think the pairing of Adam and Kate will be extremely informative and give you everything you need to publish your first book, if not more. So again, thank you everyone for joining. I will send an email with the video out as soon as it's ready, so you can revisit this informative chat, and we'll see you and hopefully read your seasteading novels in the near future.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Carly.
Thank you.